So welcome once again to our talk. It's called Real World Java EE6 Tutorial. And it's actually about building a live application. So we're going to do a lot of live coding. And you might have also been interested by our subtitle because it's called Duke's Duct Tape Adventures. So let's see what's that all about. Just a brief introduction. This is Paul. I'm Bert. We are both from the Netherlands. We work for a company called Luminous, which is a services company in the Netherlands, about 100 people. We do a lot of interesting customer projects. A lot of them are on Java enterprise technologies. We do also mobile stuff and things like that. And Paul has a very interesting job because he works for our R&D department, and we also are heavily involved in all sorts of open source development. We run our own open cloud innovation platform, and we also do a lot. We also contribute a lot to Apache platforms, to Apache projects, and also to JBoss projects. So enough about that. Let me quickly start with a disclaimer, just because it's really cool to have a disclaimer as one of your first slides. I've seen that with all the Oracle people, so I just want to have my own. Well, this is a little bit different from theirs. I mean, we do live coding, so we have no idea what we're going to talk about. We have no idea how much, bad words we're going to use. We have no idea about full frontal nudity and all kind of other stuff that we will be showing you today. So if you think you cannot handle that, now is the time to leave. All right. And if you're ready for that, then you're in for a nice 2 hours, I guess. So let's see. So obviously, when you talk about Java EE, you're trying to build an enterprise application, right? That's what Java EE, that's what EE stands for. Well, in the past, people thought EE stood for Java Evil Edition, right? So that's wrong. So it stands for Java Enterprise Edition. So obviously, we're trying to build enterprise applications with that. So what is an enterprise application actually? Well, of course, every application that you build has a lot of functional requirements. But then the different thing about enterprise applications is that you also have a lot of interesting non-functional requirements. Non-functional requirements being about security, about availability, about consistency, about transactions, stuff like that, right? So we're going to use some of those non-functionals in our application that we will be building. And then typically when you talk about enterprise applications today, you talk about building transactional web applications. So most of the time you have like a web front end, and you do some transactional CRUD stuff in your application, have some business logic, and you try to integrate with, for example, a backend database. So you do some persistent stuff. We will be doing that as well. And you will probably have some web services, being it SOAP or REST, as you try to integrate with other systems, or you are opening up your own system for integration by others. So next question that we can ask is, what's the typical example of an enterprise application? Well, think about it for a little while. You probably come up with stuff like a banking application or something for an insurance company or for telco, right? That's the kind of application that you think about, right? Well, wrong. I mean, have you ever seen this? Right? You remember this? Right. So this is the enterprise application, right? The typical enterprise application. So this is what we're going to build today. So what do you need in order to build such an application, right? You need a web framework to do all of your web stuff, your UI. It's going to be in the web, in the browser, and there's also a little server piece to that as well. So we're going to use a server-side web framework. Then we are doing some business logic, so we need some transactional components for that. And then, of course, to hook up everything up, so to hook up our transactional components to our web components, we're going to do dependency injection using CDI. And then, of course, we have to save state in the database. So we use persistence for that. We're going to use JPA for that. And then we do some web services. In our case, we're going to do RESTful services. And then, of course, no application is complete today if you don't do testing. So we're going to do testing as well. It's real-world application, so we should do some TDD, right? Not all TDD, just we have 2 hours, but some TDD. So then, next to the features and the different architectural layers, we have to take some architecture in mind. So the typical architecture for a Java EE application is a 5-tier architecture. So we are doing separation of concerns. So we are separating out our user interface from our navigation logic. So the presentation logic will reside in the browser, for example. And then our navigation logic resides on the server. So that determines which page to render or the order in which a wizard will run. And then it will call on some business logic. The business logic will be transactional. It contains, well, obviously the business logic of our application and well, some interesting calculations and stuff like that. And then at some point we need to save something in a database, or we need to get some data from the database. So we use a data access layer for that. And the data access layer will of course talk to a database, which resides in the at the rightmost layer, which is called data, which is actually not a Java layer, but it's just a database separated out from our application. Right, so this is the typical application for an enterprise application. We will adhere to the principles set forward in such a 5-tier architecture. And at the end, when we are finished building the application, we will review the code that we've built and look if it still adheres to a 5-tier architecture, if we still have clean separation of concerns, if we do some design patterns, stuff like that. So we will talk about that later. So, when we start building our application, we should ask ourselves, what would MacGyver do, right? So, do you still know who MacGyver is? Everybody know who MacGyver is, right? Oh man, we're getting old, right? He was like our youth hero, right? So that tells you a little bit about how old we are. But you know, MacGyver, well, he would probably have built bombs, but then no, he would have used a lot of duct tape, right? So we tried to do duct tape as well, but we do Java E6. So the modern day MacGyver would have probably used Java E6. That's a duct tape of today. So here it is. Here's our Java E6 duct tape, looking good, and you see duct tape is really cool. So yeah. So the quote of today, if you remember one thing from this presentation, then it would be this: Java E6 is the duct tape of modern enterprise development. Right. So think about that for a while, and we're going to show you how it works. Right, so seriously, let's start. Before we start, let's show them our sleeves. So you have long sleeves, but there's nothing in it, so we will start from scratch. So then what we're going to use is JBoss AS7, just one of the application servers which is Java E6 compatible. There are 14 out there, so you can pick your own, pick your favorite. You could have used Glassfish or WebLogic or even WebSphere. Then we need a database, so we took MySQL because it's Oracle Conference, so why not? And then we needed a build tool. We thought about that for a long time, and then finally said, okay, well, we cannot find a real build tool, so we use Maven. And then finally, we needed a Java IDE, and then, well, it was a guess. I mean, we took Paul's favorite, which happens to be IntelliJ. And actually, when you're at a conference, when you're speaking at a conference, as a self-respecting presenter, you gotta have a Mac and use IntelliJ. That's just a little pro tip for you if you want to do presentations on your own. So, let's revise the whole pet store idea a little bit, because as we know, pet stores are really cool, but essentially they suck, right? So, as we talked about duct tape, let's think of a little bit better analogy. So let's do a revised pet store, and let's come up with Duke's duct tape clothing store, right? So we combine the best of both worlds. So let's see where this goes. I mean, that's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun. Okay. It's about time I stop talking and let Paul do some coding, right?
All right.
Here we go.
So, like Bert said, I've nothing prepared. Well, no code or project or something like that. And what I want to have, and it already goes wrong. Yeah, there we go. I've got IntelliJ started up. There's no project yet, and we're just going to start from scratch. We do want to use Maven, though. Well, I don't really want to use, but most of the time you should use Maven. So, because it just makes sense in larger projects. And that's always a problem to get started with, because, well, I have to write my POM file, then I have to add dependencies to it, I have to configure all those Java EE stuff and a bunch of other stuff. Then I have to start adding configuration files to it, and that's just a lot of work. And I can just copy-paste my way through this next 2 hours, but, well, that's not very interesting. So I'm going to use another tool, a tool I actually worked on, and it's called JBoss Forge. We're going to use JBoss Forge. It's just a command line tool to, get us started. I'm not going to generate complete applications with it, I'm just going to get us started. So let's go to the right directory and say I want to have a new project with a name, and the name should be, Java 1 duct tape. And let's give the final name ducttape.war. That's it. Now let's go to IntelliJ and let's see what we got. Let's make sure it fits on the screen. What we have here is just a basic empty Maven project. There's no code in it, and if you look at a POM file, it's, well, basically empty. There's nothing Java specific in this just yet. Not very interesting. Well, I think the first thing we should do is, well, make this a web project, because in the end we just want to have our duct tape store, which is a web application, so we should start adding JSF and some other stuff later on. So let's go back to Forge for a second, because, well, at least I need some dependencies in my Maven POM file. I need the Java specification dependencies. I do need some configuration files for JSF and CDI, because I want to use CDI in JSF. So, well, let's do that. So I tell Forge, well, I will make sure everyone can see that. Let's tell Forge phases setup to set up JSF. And Forge recognizes that the packaging of my application in Maven is still a jar file. And now we're going towards a web application, so it will ask me, do you want to make this a WAR packaged application? And I think that's a great idea. And it says, well, to work with JSF and CDI, you will have to reference some APIs. And you have to put them as Maven dependencies. And JBoss offers a nice set of dependencies as a Maven dependency, APIs I mean. And we can just use those, but these are just APIs. There are no implementations, because the implementations of those APIs, of the Java APIs, are already in application server. So I can even use this if I use WebLogic or Glassfish or whatever. Next question Forge asked me is, well, if you use JSF, it does make sense to use CDI. You don't have to, technically, but I think you should always do that, because it's much better than the JSF bean specification. So let's add CDI. You also ask me, do you want to have a facelet mapping in your web.xml? Well, no, we use serverless 2.0, so we don't need to. And we're done. Let's take a look at the project again. Let's make IntelliJ happy first. There we go. And let's take a look at the POM file. So here we have the POM import of the specifications. And this contains all the Java specifications. But once again, only APIs. So we don't actually ship it in our WAR file. And then for each specific technology that we use, we just have the specific dependency, and all of those are provided, which means it will never end up in my WAR file, and the application server should have it installed already, which it does because it's Java EE. And that's basically it for the POM file. Let's see what else we have. We have a web app directory now, because it's a web application. We have beans.xml, which is empty, but this enables CDI. And we have an empty phases config to enable JSF. So far, so good. So, well, let's try if this application actually works. Let's try to create a Java EE web page. Hello.xhtml. It's a faceless page. Hello, Java 1. And let's try to deploy this on the server. So we're going to use JBoss today. There's one little problem in the current Mac version of Java 7, which comes with a nice NIO bug, so I have to add some VM options. This is just my WAR file picked up by IntelliJ, so that should work. I can start up the application server. And go to the correct URL.
Hello.
Oops. There we go. Hello Java 1. That wasn't so hard. This is going to look very boring if it's just a white screen with some text on it. So let's start with adding some user interfaces. But there's a problem with that because I suck at CSS and everything related to that. So I'm not going to do that live here. That's the only time I'm going to cheat. I'm going to drag in some CSS files and some images to just make this look a little bit better. So just drag this over here. Yes, please. And there's just some CSS, some images, some JavaScript, and that's it. There's nothing interesting in there for the rest. One file we should look at though, which is my template.xhtml. This is another JSF page, and this is a template in JSF, one of the features in JSF too. So this is basically my page structure with some styling on it that I want to use on every single page. And we will actually just get a structure and put our content of specific pages, and we'll just insert it right here. So you see here there's a tag called UI insert with a name, and later on I will actually make my pages, and they will just be inserted. You could say included, but that's technically not completely correct. But you could say included right here. So this will make sure every page will have some nice look and feel. And to start using that, I can create a new page. In this case, it's Vetus composite. I don't need an HTML tag and stuff like that anymore. Index.html. And what you see here, there's a reference to my template. And this makes sure that everything in between this define block will be inserted right here with the UI insert. So that's the way you can do templating in JSF in a very convenient way. So let's try this again. Hello again, Java 1. And now we should have an index.xhtml if I would actually hit the right buttons. There we go. This looks much more like our duct tape store. Although it's not really doing anything yet, but at least it looks good. By the way, I did do this styling, so it's not really considered good, but better than it was. So, well, tell me, what are you going to build?
So it's interesting. We want to do a duct tape clothing store, so of course we should have something that we can sell. So maybe we should start up with a little list of products that appear on the page. And it would be, since the, well, creating of the list of products should be done by some sort of a business logic part, it would be nice to hook up some business logic to the JSF part that you just created.
Yeah, sure. So let's start simple. Let's just create some in-memory list of products and show that on a page, just to start with. So first of all, well, it would make sense to create an actual product class. I'm going to delete this, create a new class, which is duct tape .entities.product. And my product should have at least a name and maybe a price. I want to give it some constructors, some getters and setters, and I think that should do it. Okay, and now we need something to connect our page that will show the products, well, to a list of products. So we should have a list of products somewhere. So let's create another class, duct tape.jsf.products bin. And this is a Java class that's going to be referenced directly from the pages. So you could say this is something like a controller. And to do so, I have to say, well, this is a named bin. This is a JSF CDI annotation. And by this, I can use this class directly. I can reference it using expression language on my JSF pages. And you will see that in a moment. And I want to make sure it's request scoped. So for every new HTTP request, I will get a new instance of this class. And then we will need a list of products. And for now, it's just an array list. And I need a getter method to actually return some products. There we go. So let's say if products is null, then we create a new one. and add some products to it. Okay. So this should be enough on the Java side for this very simple example. And then we should go back to the, let's actually return it. And then we should go back to the JSF page, our index HTML page. And here it would make sense to start with a table. And in JSF, that's a data table. And the data table should, well, show the list of products. So let's first reference this list of products that I just created. And I even get context help here from the ID. And it will show, well, there's a products bean. You have an add named product bean, so you can reference it directly from a page. And there's a get method for products, so we can use that. I should give it a name. This is the name of each product while iterating over it. And I need some columns with maybe a title on top of it. So this is the name, product.name. And I also want to show the price. Product.price. There we go. And you see IntelliJ, but also Eclipse or NetBeans will just help you with, well, even using expression language, and I don't have to type a lot, really. So let's try if we can actually run this. And that seems to work. And we have our two products, and we can show them. One more step before we continue, because I did prepare some images. So, no, let's do that later, by the way. Yeah. Okay, back to you.
Okay, the logical next thing to do is probably to put the products in a database. So Java 6 has some really nice technology to work with databases, especially relational databases. So we have the JPA framework. So it would be nice to turn our product model thing that we had just a couple of minutes ago, turn it into some sort of a JPA entity, and then persist that to a database. Right, so we can just replace your static products with some real products coming from a database.
Okay. So a few things we have to do to set up JPA. The most important and the most annoying thing is that you have to set up a persistence.xml file. And that's just an XML file which configures which data source you want to use, which provider you want to use. In our case, you probably want to use Hibernate. And the problem is that you only write those kind of files once in a project. So after a week, you forget completely what's in there, and you have to go back to Google and find out again how it looked like. Or you can go back to Forge and say, well, in Forge, I want to have persistence setup. I'm going to try that again. Persistence setup provider. I want to use Hibernate. I want to use a specific container. No, we're using JBoss AS7, so I'm going to use actually custom JTA, because I prepare the data source. And I have to give the name of the data source, which is duct tape. This is something I prepared in the application server. I'm sorry you can't read it at the bottom of the screen. Can't do anything about it. But it asks me now, do you want to use JPA to make a model generator? And I'm going to skip that for this demo, but Forge can actually configure that. But it will make my build times a little bit slower in Maven, so let's not do that. And it will also ask me, well, you selected Hibernate. Do you also want to use the provider-specific extensions of Hibernate? Or do you just want to use the standardized JPA APIs? And I just want to use the standard JPA stuff because that's more than enough for what I need today. So let's go back to IntelliJ.
Just wanted to stress for a minute here that although we're using some JBoss stuff, JBoss application server and Forge, but you can use Forge, of course, on all of the other application servers that you mentioned, Jen, just to get that clear.
And the application we are writing doesn't use any kind of external framework, so you could just as easily run it on any kind of other Java application server. All right, so now we have our persistent.xml. It did get configured to use the duct tape data source in the application server, and it uses Hibernate as our provider. So that was easy enough. Let's go back to our product and make it a full-blown entity. By saying this is an entity. And one of the rules of JPA is that an entity should always have a primary key, which makes a lot of sense in a relational database. And an ID is just, for example, a long and UI annotated ID. And I want the database to generate this for me. So I say generate this value. And that should be it. Then of course we have to have some logic that actually, well, uses JPA to go to the database and ask for a list of products from the database. Because so far I just used my products bin, and well, that's just an in-memory list, and I want to replace this code by code for JPA. But to keep our layers clean, I don't want to write that code right in my JSF bin. This is something specifically to facilitate one JSF page, and I don't want to have any kind of well, JPA code or business logic right in here. So I'm going to create a new class, and that's going to be an EGB, and that's our product data access object.
Weren't EGB supposed to be evil?
Yeah, well, it's supposed to be, but it isn't.
Okay. You convinced me now.
Yeah. So in the old days, in the J2EE days, EGB was just a mess to work with. I mean, it would at least take me 2 hours to actually, well, get one doing nothing just configured. And it's a lot easier now. The only thing I have to do is just create a Pojo, add some annotations to it, and I've got my EGB. So let's do that. But first of all, I have to add some APIs again. EGB setup. This just adds some Maven dependency again. And with that, I can say add stateless. So this one annotation makes this Pojo a stateless session bean. And what does a stateless session bean do? Well, maybe you can tell that.
Well, actually, it doesn't keep any state, so that's why it's the name. So actually, it contains your business logic, and all of the methods inside of the stateless session bean will be executed by the container for you. So it gives you automatic transaction management, automatic transaction demarcation, and the container will also pool those beans. So as soon as a client comes to request a piece of business logic, it will take one out of the pool, serve you with the transactional method, and then it will return the bean to the pool, and then it can be reused for another client.
Yep. And because we have this transaction management, it's extremely easy to use JPA in an EGB. I just say I want to have a persistence context. It gives me an entity manager. And then I can start writing my method that returns a product or a list of products. Well, let's start just with a very basic query. I will make it a little bit more advanced later on by saying entity-manager.create query, select products from products, and it's of type product.class. And I want to get the result list and return that. Because the transaction management in EGB, as soon as this method is called, the transaction is started, a new entity manager or a new persistence context is created for me. And at the end of the method, the persistence context will be cleaned up again, the transaction will be committed if there's no exceptions, and I don't have to do anything for that. So you really can't call EGBs heavyweight anymore, it's just that easy. I do have some error somewhere though. Can't resolve product. I think that's because IntelliJ is not completely happy yet. There we go. Okay, so let's start using this product data access object. And for that we're going to go back to our JSF bin, throw away this code, actually this code, and from here we should start using the data access object. how do we get to our data access object? It's an EGB. Wouldn't it be difficult to look it up in the JNDI context and stuff like that?
Oh,
well,
yeah.
no.
Yeah, well, it was very difficult in the past. You do like a portable remote object.narrow. That was cool, right?
You're from the Corba times.
Yeah.
You're
I'm
like
sorry.
old-fashioned.
Okay.
But today we don't have to use Corba, luckily, and we don't have to use lookups either, because we have CDI now, which is context and dependency injection, which is the standardized dependency injection solution for Java EE. And you can just use annotations for dependency injection and a lot more stuff that I will show later on. So let's say @inject product data access object, and that's it. We will just ask the container, give me an instance of product data access object. Doesn't matter if it's some kind of POJO or it's an EGB, or it really doesn't matter. And I see a question over there.
Yeah, why would you use the inject annotation versus the JB annotation?
Well, the question is, why would you use @inject instead of @EGB, the annotation that we already had in Java EE 5? Well, that's also actually the answer. The @EGB annotation just works for EGBs. And that was something introduced in Java EE 5. And CDI is introduced in Java EE 6. And it's a much more general dependency injection solution. And in this bean, I really don't care if my product data access object is either an EGB or just some POJO. That's an implementation detail that I don't care about. So that's why I want to avoid using those very technology specific annotations. And I think at some point that EGB annotation should be deprecated in a future version, because it's just, well, very much obsolete right now. I did hear something about Spring, but should I ignore it, or?
No, we're not going to answer.
No,
we're not going to answer any question about Spring, right? Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
If this is request scope, so each request is going to generate a new instance. Why are we creating fields? Wouldn't you want to put them in method scope? At least in the past, I'm an old Java developer, so I'm here for E6. You get pretty good performance benefits from using request or method scope fields versus having to access the class scope fields. So, is there any particular reason? Just pattern that you typically use?
It's a pattern we typically use and a pattern that works pretty well, but as far as I know, there's no real performance benefit or downside to doing it this way.
Okay. Because it just, in the past, it just kind of implies that there's state for the object because it's class scope.
Yeah, well, actually there is some scope. It's a very short scope, it's just a request scope. But if you look at JSF, it would perfectly be possible to have multiple pages in one request, or multiple parts of a page in one request, that all want to access my products method. So this method can be invoked multiple times in one request. In that case, I don't want to go back to the database for each time I invoke it, because I already have that data right in there for the request. So that's why I have this if statement here, and I'm just going to go to my data access object when I need to. Okay. So we say products is product data access object dot list products. There we have it.
So this will probably give us a rather boring index page, because there's no objects in the database right now.
I would already be happy if I don't get an error.
Okay. Oh, yeah, it's your talk today, right?
But you're right, I'm lucky.
Okay.
But this is boring because it does go to the database, but my database is just created and it's empty and there's no products in there, so it doesn't show anything. That makes sense. So it would be nice if you can, during development, if you can actually use something to generate some test data for us. And we can, misuse EGBs a little bit for that. So I'm going to create another EGB here, and that's going to be the test data generator. And I just want to make sure that whenever my application gets deployed, that this EGB is going to be called once, every time I redeploy or start the application. And to do so, I should say this is a singleton EGB, and it should be started automatically. Normally it will just be instantiated as soon as I start to use it from another place, from using CDI. In this case, I just want to start it immediately when the container starts up. I need another persistence context because I'm going to use JPA. Entity manager. Public void setup test data. And just to make sure this is going to be invoked automatically, I say it's a post construct method. So this instance is created at application startup time, and it will automatically call this method. And from here I can say, well, I'm going to save some products, persist some products. I'm going to create right here. And of course we have to decide what kind of products we actually want to sell. So let's take a look at some images that I have. We have pants.
That's nice.
Let's look at the next one. Yeah, shoes.
Are those dollars or euros? Or?
I have no idea. I'm not good in business. Yes, tape. That makes sense.
So you can build your own clothes with that, right?
This is interesting. I will call the fart stopper. Oh, I did throw away my other one.
That's rather expensive, but something that you must have in your inventory, right?
And this looks like a, well,
this is like a business
dress.
suit, yeah.
Yeah.
Ah, it's a dress now.
Okay,
Whatever.
good enough. So we have our 5 products. I just, well, insert them here using JPA. This is just something you can use during development. This is not something you would use in production, but it's a nice feature to use right now. And, well, just deploy it and see what happens.
Based off of the logic that you, or the response that you gave to the other question, why would you use EJB singleton here instead of the inject singleton?
Right. It's slightly different. The @EGB annotation he was asking about is for injecting stuff. This is for telling what kind of component it is. And because I want to use transactions here, because I'm actually going to the database and persisting stuff, I need my transactions, so it needs to be an EGB. Otherwise I have to do transaction management myself.
Yeah, so the singleton is just a new EJB type, just so you have stateless, stateful, and singleton now.
But you're right, there's also a singleton from CDI, which is not an EGB, so there's no transaction management, but it's also a singleton. So the scope is similar, but functionality is different. I just did deploy it, and we have some pens. The pictures are missing though, so let's add those. Just
No,
for
add those later on a deal, please.
Well, no, I just want to add them
You
now.
want to have here? Okay, well, whatever. We have the time.
Yeah.
Are you going to make the project available later on?
You want to have the pictures?
But yeah, we will. We will put it on GitHub. I don't know what I'm doing. I need a graphic image, and it's going to be from a library. That's just another JSF feature, which is called images, and it has a name, which is product.id, .jpeg. Wait a second, I'm going to make this mistake.
You missed the equal sign next to the name attribute.
I think it's right there. Yeah. Just want to make sure that every time I compile something, it actually gets built.
Oops.
Oh, right. I didn't add the getter or setter for the...
For the ID.
Yeah.
Sure.
There we go.
There they are.
And there it is again.
Somehow it still looks like a user interface made by a programmer, but maybe that's just me. Okay, so this is very nice, but we did a little bit of JPA, and there's this awesome new cool feature in JPA now, which is called the Criteria Query API, and which gives you some queries which are a little bit hard to write, but then give you some advantages in the end. So maybe you can show off a little bit about the Criteria API as well?
Yeah, sure. So let's go back to our products data access object. And well, the real downside of doing this is just a string, right? And although IntelliJ does try to, well, parse it and tell me if it's correct or not, it's easy to make a typing mistake here, and I will just find out during runtime. It will just blow up in my face and tell me I did something wrong. Wouldn't it be nice to have some more compiler support here, so that actually the compiler can tell me, well, the thing you just wrote is just doesn't make any sense. And with JPA2 we can. There's a criteria API. It costs a little bit more code to write, but it's more type safe, and well, it's also more flexible, as we will see later on. So let's just change this. I'll ask for the criteria builder. With the criteria builder, we can say I want to have a from. Create query to start with, and here we have to specify the type. Is the type going to be returned by the query? And then we say I want to select something, and that's also going to be I have to select something from somewhere, and I think the microphone is yes, thanks. So we say criteria builder dot. Yes,
the
thanks.
audio guy just left the room, or?
Am I still on? Yeah. So I'm going to select from something. I'm also going to select from product. And then I'm going to select the product. So what you see here, it's a little bit more code than just the one string I did just now, which doesn't really make sense now because it was a very simple query. But as soon as my queries start to be more complex, and we'll get to that in a minute, it's actually a lot more flexible and a lot more type safe, so I will notice mistakes earlier. And to finish this off, I have to say return query dot entity manager dot create query from my query and return the result. And then we just hope it works. And it still does.
Okay, cool. So actually you've already proven that the code you wrote works, but I think we talked a little bit about testability earlier on, so I think it's about time to write our first unit test. But then we might run into some problems there, because unit testing Java EE stuff in the past has been pretty much hard. I mean, you had to test stuff which uses container services. So as soon as you use components which use container services, you have to mock them, right? So you have to either mock them or, well, instantiate some sort of a container, do an in-container test. There were some frameworks which could do in-container tests, but it was a rather much of a hassle to set that up. So do you have anything in mind, so how we can do like a real unit test but then run it in container?
Yeah, but let's first take a look at the code. The problem is, if I would write a real unit test, I would have to mock out my dependencies here, which in this case is the entity manager. What exactly would I test if I'm going to use a mocked entity manager with this code? The only interesting part here is the query. And to test the query, I have to go to a real database and figure out that the query actually does make sense and if it returns the data that I would expect. So for code like this, it just doesn't make sense to use unit tests because you're not testing anything. You're just testing if you can invoke mocks, and probably you can. So instead, we need a way to go to the container, do a real deployment, and run some tests in the container. Using a real database, using transactions, using JPA and EGB, use injections like CDI. That's what we need. So there's a really nice framework for that now. It's also from JBoss, and it's called JBoss Archillion. And JBoss Archillion makes it possible to do in-container integration tests. So let's just get started with that. Forge has a plugin for Archillion, and we have to set that up. And the problem is that to communicate and deploy to a container, there's some very specific code required. So there's a different implementation for, well, every different container supported by Archillion. And you can just add them all if you like, if you want to test on different kind of containers. But in this case, I'm just going to add JBoss AS7 or JS Remote 7, because that's what we use. And it will ask me for some versions. First of all, it will ask me what kind of Archillion version do you want to use. And I want to use the latest stable version. We're going to write tests, so we're going to use JUnit. So it will ask me for which JUnit version I want to use, latest. And it will ask me what version of the application server I want to use, because that might make a difference. And I'm on 7.1.1, which is the latest final. And let's add that. Let's go back to IntelliJ and see what happens. So here I have my POM file. There are some new dependencies here, Archillion dependencies. And more importantly, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a new Maven profile. So we can add a new Maven profile for each container that we want to test against. In this case, I just have JBoss AS, but I might also want to run my test in Glassfish. And you could do this on a build server, for example, automatically just have all the possible application servers installed somewhere and just run all your tests on all of them. So that's all the Archillion setup. And now I want to have a test case. So let's go back to Forge one more time. I say Archillion create test. And it will ask me, well, what class do you want to test? And we're going to test our data access object, which is the product data access object. And I want to enable JPA. Let's go back here. We have a new class generated by Forge. We'll try to make it fit on the screen a little bit better. So what do we have here? We have something that looks very similar, at least, to just a plain JUnit test. And, well, it basically is. It's just using JUnit. The only difference is that on top, I annotated it with Archillion. So the life cycle of this test will actually be controlled by the Archillion framework. The next thing that I need to do for Archillion is add a deployment method. And a deployment method defines what I want to deploy to my server. Archillion uses the concept of micro deployments. Instead of just packaging up your whole application with maybe hundreds or thousands of classes in it and try to deploy that and run your tests, we're just going to create a very small deployment with maybe 3-4 classes in it and maybe a few configuration files, package that in a real jar file, send it to the application server, run our tests. Our test is actually deployed as part of the deployment, run the tests in the container, undeploy everything again, and that just should take like a second or a few seconds. So we just have very small deployments. And in the deployment method, we have to specify what classes and what configuration files we want to add to the micro deployment. So of course we want to have the product data access object, but I also want my test data to be there. And I want to have all my entities. Product.class.getPackage. And besides that, I still want to use JPA, so I need my configuration file, and I want to enable CDI so I can use injection. Okay, let's start simple. Let's just try to run this test, and this test will just check if actually the product data access object can be injected into my test. So if injection works and if the deployment was successful. To do so, I do have to enable my Maven profile. That's what I just added. Otherwise, the Archillion setup is not activated. And let's then try to run the test. And remember, this test is actually going to be deployed to the running application server. We will see it right here. And I forgot to change the NIO setting. This is again the Java 7 bug on the Mac. Let's try that again. Green bar, they make me happy. Okay, let's add some real test code because we didn't really test much yet. Public void test list products. And we're going to ask the product data access object for the list of products. And well, let's assert that products.size is, I think I added 5 products.
Yes.
Need some imports for that. And as you can see, this is just plain JUnit. Let's run it again. And we actually have our test that does a query. Well, actually first insert some test data, runs a query using JPA, using my real database, so running on MySQL, and that all works in like under a second.
I don't know, I may have missed it, but you created 5 products when the server started, right? And every time you start the server, it'll keep on adding 5 products, right? Or did you delete it?
There's several options here. What I choose, and that's what I use for development mostly, is I just keep my application server running all the time.
Okay.
And what you see here is that
So it was on server startup, not deployment. That's why.
the test data inserter, you mean? Well, actually, if you look at the persistence.xml, I now understand your question. If you look at the persistence.xml, you see that the data is dropped every time I undeploy something. So actually, when I go to my page now, it will be empty.
Not a good setting for production. Right.
No. And I'm going to change that because it's going to be annoying.
That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah.
So every time you deploy it, you end up recreating the whole database. And then
Yeah. Right.
Right. So, Paul, I noticed that as soon as we started doing some test code, we are losing some people, so we shouldn't test too much, I guess. Maybe it's time to spice up the user interface a little bit and add some sorting to the list of products, and so that we can also use our criteria query for some more useful purposes.
Sure. Well, I do like testing, so I will just start testing more.
I have one more question.
Sure.
Can you like do the testing against the embeddable EJB container, not like so that you don't have to have like the installed application server and you want to
You
run
can, yeah. There's well, let's take a look at Forge again. If we use Archelian setup, there's a whole list of containers, and like half of them are embedded.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, you can.
You see, we're losing one again.
Yeah.
You talk too much about testing.
Sorry.
Another question in the back. Yeah.
So can the test be automated or run out with Jenkins or Husky?
The question was, can we run this in a Maven build running on Jenkins or something like that? Yeah, we can. This is all just, well, tests supported by Maven. There's nothing special about that, so it absolutely works. Just run your Maven build like normal.
Yeah, you should have your application server running, or you should start it up as soon as you do the testing. Right. So let's do the sorting thing.
Yeah.
In some cases, we were using like mock EGB to simulate that, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you can in some cases. For other examples of code, it does make sense to use a mocking framework like Mockito or something like that. You should absolutely do that. You don't have to use Archelian for all your tests, just for the tests where it makes sense. So, okay, let's get to more testing. So, what we will probably need, well, Bert said, let's do some sorting on the page. So, if you go to the page, I would say if you click on price, it should be sorted on price. If you click it again, it should be inverted. And, well, I think that's enough sorting.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And maybe later on I'm going to just build on supporting that on my backend already. Maybe later on we also want to do some filtering of products. So let's try to add that in the backend first. So I'm going to add a method here, which is going to look very similar to this one. But this time I'm going to add a filter, and I'm going to boolean ascending or descending. And I'm going to move this code over here and just use this one to override it. Okay, so let's start by sorting. So, well, if it's ascending, then I want to sort ascending on price, and if it's descending, I want to go the other way around. And that's what we can do in the criteria API very easily. We just add some more lines of code. We say if ascending, then we're going to add an order by, and the order by should be on query builder.ascending, because we want to sort ascending, and it's going to order on product.get price. And this is not exactly the best example, because what you see here, I'm using the criteria API in a non-type safe way. What we do here, well, we use a string to name a field. What if I change that field name? Well, this will break. If you use the criteria API for real, you have to use the annotation processor coming with either Eclipse Link or Hibernate or something like that. That will actually create a static meta model of this code, and then I can make it completely type safe. But I have to configure it in IntelliJ, and I just don't want to go there right now. So forgive me for not being type safe. So this is all the sorting code that we need, and that should work. So we added some code. Now we should add some tests.
Brave.
So let's just make sure that if I ask for this, that the first product should have a price, get price of, what did I say? I think it's 10. Let's see if that works first. Yep, that worked. Let's try the other way around.
Why do you keep testing the size? You have already done that in the...
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that should be 50 or something. Cool, so that worked. I will come back to the filter later on. Let's first implement the user interface on top of this sorting functionality. So, what should we do exactly? Looking at this page, first of all, I want to make this clickable. And it's a web page, so that should be a link. So let's make it a link. It's going to be a link, and it's going to have a parameter. This is just a URL parameter. It's going to have a name order with a value of the inverse of the previous order. So I'm going to go back to my products bin. I didn't actually add anything there, so well, IntelliJ is not going to help me here. So I want to get the inverse of order. Okay, let's go back to the product bin. And here we want to store the current sorting. Private Boolean order is by default true. And let's start using it here when we call the data access object. And then I need some getters and setters, because I will actually want to, well, pass in this URL parameter into my bean here. So I need a getter and setter for order. Okay, then I need one more thing, because when I click this link, I'll actually do a new request to my JSF page. It's stateless, and I want to be stateless at this moment. And well, it loses all information, so I should actually pick up the URL parameter that is added by the link and well, save that in this bin using the set method, so that the next time I get a list of products, it will sort the right way. To pick up a URL parameter in JSF, we add some metadata, and that's a view parameter with a name. The name should be the same as I added before, so that's order. And it has a value, and the value here is the place where it will be stored. So that's product bin.order. And well, that might work. Let's try it. Besides the fact that I can't create a URL.
You created all
This is the most weird user interface you have ever seen. But I think it's awesome, so I'm just going to leave it like this.
Okay, interesting. Well, let's assume that I like one of the products in your list, and that I want to see more details about it. So I want to have like a separate detail page. So, and then when I look at the detail page, I want to be able to send a bookmark to that certain detail page to one of my friends, because I think he will like it as well.
Right. So this is also one of the things people have been complaining about a lot in the past about JSF. JSF used to be not very stateless. There used to be state everywhere, even if you just want to have a link, which didn't make any sense. But well, times have changed, luckily. So let's start by creating a new page. It's going to be a new faces composite, and let's call it details.xhtml. And here I just want to show my product. Let's call it product detail bin dot product dot name. It's not there yet, but we'll get there. So let's add a new Java class. Product details bin. It's going to be another request scoped named bin, and it's going to have a product. But there's a problem here, because we can't just, well, get a product from nowhere, and Bert just said, well, I want to send my friends a link, and that link should just, well, be a link to that specific product. If you look at URLs, well, it would make more sense to add a URL parameter with a product ID in it, for example. So that's what we're going to use to just keep this completely stateless. And we're going to use a product ID. And this product ID should be passed in from the URL parameters again. And then I want to have a method, void method, load product. That's going to use my data access object again. Product DAO. And I didn't actually add a method for getting a single product yet. So let's add that. And that should go the other way around. Okay. And once again, this is temporarily state for this request that I'm instantiating here. Okay, so let's create or go back to the details page. And details page, I have to make sure that the product ID request parameter is actually put into the bean, and that the load method, the load product method, is actually invoked before the request is rendered. So we add some metadata again with a view parameter, name product ID, and value product details bean dot product ID. I didn't create a getter and setter yet. And then we need an event of type pre-rendered component event and a listener of product details bean dot load product. All right. So what happens here? As soon as the page is loaded, it will go to the request parameters, get a PID from that, store it in the product details bean. After that, it will invoke the load product method. The load product method will actually go to the database and retrieve the product from it. And from there on, I can just use the getters and setters again, like I did before, together with the expression language to show the product on the page, if I add getters and setters. So we need getters and setters both for the PID and for the product itself. So that's one step. Now we have to go back to the index page to actually add a link. That's going to be a link with a value of the product name, and once again a parameter name PID with a value product.id. I can't type anymore. Yes, I think that should be it. So let's try to click it, and absolutely nothing happens because I didn't actually create the link correctly. I have to tell it where to go, of course. Otherwise, we'll just stay on the same page. And I call it details.xhtml. Better. So, of course, it's very simple detail page. But right here, you can see there's the details.xhtml with a PID in it. I can just give this to someone else in another browser session, and it will just load the same product again. This is, of course, not rocket science on the web. This is just a link, but this used to be very difficult in JSF 1.2, and luckily this is now just possible like you would expect. So, what else is on your mind?
All right, let's go back to the index page, please, and then it would be nice to have like this filter on this page.
Yep.
So as soon as I start typing and the name of a product, the server will filter out the products for me.
Okay, can do that. Well, let's go back to my data access object again first to actually implement the filter functionality there. And this time I'm first going to go to my test and say I want to have a new test, public void test filtered product, and go to the product data access object, say list products, and in this case I'm going to add a filter. So let's start looking for the fart thing. And let's just make sure that it returns one product. Okay, let's try to run it. It should fail, because I didn't actually implement my filter yet. And it does fail. And why does it fail? It fails because it returned 5 products because I didn't filter anything and I expected 1. Okay. So let's go back to our criteria query. And the really nice thing about criteria queries is that I can just add new filters, well, depending on input that I get. Instead of starting messing with string appends, which is dangerous and, well, error prone, I can just say, well, if my filter is not null, I'm going to add my filter. Query.where query builder.like product.get name, and it should filter on my filter and a wildcard. And because I not type safe, I have to actually tell it. It should be typed. Okay, let's try it again. And it looks much better. So data access object is complete. Now let's go back to the products bean again, and we're going to add a string filter here and pass that filter right here. Of course, we need getters and setters for it again. And with that, we can go back to the index page, and right on top of it, I'm going to say I want to have an input text with a value. The value should be stored in products bean.filter, and that's it. Then we need a button to actually do the filtering for us. And let's name it filter. And let's see what that does for us. So let's say we want to have shoes, then nothing happens. Why nothing happens? I know why. We need Ajax.
Please listen error.
Sorry?
There in the button. In the button there is not the parameter.
Yeah, well, actually, I just have to submit a form. That should work, but it doesn't. So I don't have to actually invoke anything from the command button. We already submit my form, submit the filter, and pass that filter to here. Let's just continue. I think, didn't you want to have a more fun?
Products are already not null, so your product equals null is.
Oh, right, yeah, that's what I forgot. I have to check if it is possible, and that's what's happening right now, and that's just too bad. The first thing that happens here is it's first getting the products, and after that, it's setting the filter. But next time I'm actually going to list those products, it's going to say, well, products is already initialized, so I don't have to go back to the database. So thanks a lot, that's my problem right here. So let's say products is null, just to make sure that it's going to the database at the right time. There we go. There we have it. Looks a bit old-fashioned though.
Okay, so maybe we should make the business really happy right now, and we should add really nice piece of functionality, and let's do Ajax, right?
Yeah, well, Ajax will solve all our problems for sure. Yeah, let's do that. So let's go back to the page. Let's throw away this old-fashioned command button, and let's make sure we have Ajax.
So this must probably be really hard, right? Like half an hour work or something like that?
Yeah, something like that. You should get me a coffee.
Or beer.
That would be even better. So I'm going to listen for on key up events, and that's just a JavaScript event. Then I'm going to execute. No, I don't have to execute anything. I'm going to render something. I'm going to render my product table. And my product table, that's just the client ID here, product table. So what happens? I'm just going to submit this value using an Ajax request, when the AJAX request comes back, it will just re-render this product table. Well, there's new data in there, so there we have it. We have a partial page update. No, I do not want that.
Oops.
Sure. Do we have any other? No, they are all with a different name, but well, you can get the idea.
Okay, nice. So it's supposed to be a web shop. So I think we should do something that we can order. Then we can start ordering stuff. So it's about time to create something like a shopping basket, and then so that we can add products in it.
Sure.
And we should come up with a way to handle the state for the basket.
Sure. Okay. So let's create a new bin, and that's going to be our basket. And now we're going to use some well, stateful programming. So instead of saying this is going to be request scoped, this is going to be, well, a little bit longer than that, but I don't want to have it session scoped because it will mess up multiple browser tabs and things like that. So instead of that, I'm going to use a conversation scoped. And conversation scoped is always within one session, but I can have multiple conversations in parallel in one browser session. And also going to be named. And my basket does have a list of products. Products. Which is just an array list. We have to add, have a method that adds a product. I want to have a list that, a method that actually lists the products. And I want to get a total amount. There we go. So let's first try if we can actually
Just return it.
yeah, I should. And it should be serializable because it's stateful. Okay, let's see if we can actually add some products. I already had some user interface code in my template that actually shows the basket, and I call it products here. Let's call this products in basket now. Let's go back to the index page and add a button to it to each product that we can actually add it to the basket. There's going to be a command button with a value of add and action of basket dot add product, and we just pass in our product. So you can even just use parameters here, which is very convenient. Let's deploy that. We see right here the basket, and we can make I wanted to say we can make that grow, but it didn't really work because I'm losing my state all the time. Oh, right, of course. I did make it conversation scoped, but conversation scoped is by default transient, which basically means request scope. I have to pick some point in time that I actually want to say, well, this is going to be a real conversation, and from now on you should, well, work with this conversation. Until I explicitly say in code the conversation should be ended. And the way to do that is say, I want to inject a conversation object, conversation, and the first time I add a product and the conversation is not started yet, if conversation is transient, then we start a conversation. begin. Okay, we will end it later. Okay, so let's add it, and this time it works. What you also see here, there's a conversation ID in the request parameters, and that makes sure that I can actually have multiple conversations in one session, and that it will not mess up my browser tabs, etc.
So maybe we should continue with ending the conversation and do some checkout as well.
Yeah. So let's create a checkout method. And of course a new page. Or checkout XHTML. Right here we're just going to say, well, I want to have an input field to get a user's name. And we're going to store that in the basket.customer.name, which we didn't have yet. And then we're going to say command button value checkout. And that's going to invoke our basket.checkout method. Let's go back to the basket. Here we need a customer, private customer. Yeah, I didn't have it yet. Customer is new customer. Create a new class. It's going to be an entity. With a name. Okay, that's it. And well, what should happen if you check out? That's a good question. Of course, we could say, well, I'm just going to go to my database here and create a new order or something like that. But I don't really want a coupling. I don't really want that coupling here. I don't really want to care about how the order process is handling new orders. I just want to, well, be a basket. And here I just want to basically say, whoever knows how to handle orders, handle it. So let's create a new EGB. And that new EGB is the order processor. And this order processor, in this case, is just going to go to the database, public void save order. And we're going to save a web order. And a web order is another entity. And it does have a relationship of to customer, which can potentially be many to many. And we have a relationship to product, to a list of product actually. And that should be many to many, and this one should be many to one. And of course we need a primary key. Okay. Back to the EGB. We make it a stateless session bin. Entity manager. Of course it's a persistence context. Entity manager. Entity manager. And here we say entity manager.persist a web order. To make sure that doesn't break, I have to do something about the cascading here. Cascade type is persists. There we go. Okay, but once again, going back to the basket, how I'm going to actually invoke this EGB? Well, of course I could say, I'm just going to use the @inject again. But what if I want to have some other stuff that also should happen when an order is placed? Maybe I want to send some emails, maybe I want to send some messages, some SMS message, for example. There might be a whole bunch of things that happens whenever I place an order. And I don't want to know about that in my basket here. So instead of creating a tight coupling between the order process and my basket, I'm going to just fire an event and let, well, anyone who cares listen to that event.
I have a question.
Yes?
For your new entity, does it eagerly fetch your customer entity, or is it like a lazy? So when you do a query back for that order, the customer, sorry.
Yeah.
Does it eagerly fetch?
What did I make it?
By default?
So this one is going to be fetched because it's just a single entity. That's Hibernate, by the way. And this one is not going to be fetched because it's a many relationship. Okay, so we want to fire an event. And we can use the event mechanism from CDI here. There is a @inject event. This is a CDI annotation. There it is. Of type web order. And it's going to be web order event. And here I'm just going to fire that one. I'm just going to send that event to whoever is listening. Web order event .fire, and that's going to be a new web order. And I want to add my customer and products in basket to that. Okay. So I'm just going to fire an event, and I don't know who is listening to this. But of course, my order processor is going to listen to that, and it's going to do that by just say it observes web order events. That's all. Now we have in JVM event processing. Maybe we should try this.
No, we should end the conversation.
Oh yeah.
So the nice thing about the CDI event model is that it just totally decouples you. It's like out-of-band communication within the JVM, within your web application actually.
Okay. Test it.
Yes. Oh, yeah, sure. Is it guaranteed? Yeah, you can do some. The event processing can either be transactional, so it can be processed within a transaction, and if it's fired from an EGB, for example, you can even indicate when the event should be processed. So after the EGB transaction has completed, so you like an after complete, or you want to process before the complete, or just non-transactional. Yes.
Is the conversation expired?
Is the conversation what?
Will the conversation expire?
Will it conspire? Yeah.
Will it expire?
Expire.
So let's say the user does not actually click on checkout, which is where we end the conversation.
So the conversation is like a shorter session, so to speak. Yeah. So I don't know if there's a default expiration on the
Default expiration time is probably the same as the session timeout,
yeah.
but you can set your own timeout. Okay, so let's test it out. I put something in my basket already. Let's check it out.
Oops. Fuck. It goes.
Um,
The template has a different name for the checkout page, I guess.
That's weird. Basket. Oh, right. My basket doesn't have a get method for the customer. Now it does. Okay, add something to the basket again. Checkout. I'm Paul. And I check out. I did see an insert here, so that's interesting at least. Let's go to the database. let's make it fit on the screen, and let's go to the duct tape database, and we have a web order. There should be some products in there. Well, it's just IDs, so you can't really see what it is. But this was the insert I just did.
Okay, so that's interesting. So in the checkout page, you had to type in your name. And I think it's nice to add another feature of Java EE, which is bean validation. So maybe we should do some check on the customer name, for example. So you cannot order anything if your name is shorter than 2 characters, for example.
Right. Before we go there, how are we on time? Because I forgot when the session ends.
Like half an hour.
Oh, okay, great. Cool. Yes, bean validation. So we want to actually validate if the thing I wrote here is actually, well, something, and I don't want empty names. And besides that, maybe I should also add an email field and make sure that's actually an email field. So let's go back to the checkout page. And we'll start with adding an email field. Text value basket.customer.email. And the customer should, of course, have a new field email. There we have it. And what I want to do now is, well, just make sure that whenever I type something wrong here, that I get a nice error message. And actually I want to check this on 2 places. I want to check it in the user interface, because, well, that's where the user is. But I also want to check it just before I do the insert in JPA. I don't ever want anyone bypassing my user interface somehow, or maybe I have some REST service, for example, and insert some invalid data. So the way you can do that is use bean validation, which is another Java EE specification. And once again, it's just annotations. So here we can say this should be not null. And this should be an add email. This should be not null, but more specifically, not empty, because null is something else than an empty string, of course. So my name should just not be empty, and my email address should not be empty, and it should be a valid email address, or at least look like an email address. I'm not going to check if it's actually working. So that should already work, but of course I also need some feedback to the user. So let's go back to the page and add an error message. And well, here I have to say this is for the name field, and that's it. And actually make this the name field. This is going to be the email field with a message for the email field. That should probably already work. Let's test it. I'm still Paul, but I'm not going to say, tell that. And well, we have 2 error messages. Formatting is not very nice, but that's just me. So it tells, well, both fields should not be empty. Okay. I'm Paul. I'm still Paul. And then it recognizes, well, this is okay, this field, and this field is still not okay because it's not a valid email address. And then it works. So with just an annotation and well, one more tag on my page to actually show something, we have our error handling working. And once again, this is actually checked twice. This is checked when the JSF page is submitted, but it is checked again by JPA when we persist our new user or customer. And also when I'm not using JSF, but I use some other way to save something using JPA, the check will still be there. So that's very powerful way to have well, what they call dry, don't repeat yourself validation. Question?
Two questions. You use the @email annotation, and is a property of Hibernate, or are there an annotation or JPA standard?
Very good question. And you're right. If I go back to my customer, if you look at the imports here, both of them are from from the Hibernate Validator project. If you look at bean validation is just a very generic, well, validation framework. And it just contains very basic rules. A not null, a min and a max and a size, a regex, where you can just add your own expressions. But besides that, it's just very basic. So when you start using this stuff, you should add, well, your own annotations, which is pretty easy. Or you can use something like Hibernate Validator, which is not the same as the Hibernate JPA implementation. This is something you can use in other frameworks as well. And that's just more rules.
And the second one, the text of the message, the error message. Who write this message, this error?
You can specify it in the annotation, but that's a really ugly way to do it. But you can also refer to like a properties file, where you get the text from. Yes. So if you fetch it from a property file, you can do localization.
What I could do is specify the message here, and I could just write a string here. But the other thing I can do is, this is the syntax, and then my property file dot something, and that uses internationalization. Yeah.
If your validation includes business logic, is it safe to inject multiple classes in each other? So if you have like dependencies on each other, any guidelines or recommendations for that?
Yeah, I have a guideline for that. Don't do that, because it will break. That's not going to work. It just can't be resolved. So
you have a case where you have like orders and shipping and finance, and you have to make them talk to each other often in the same query. How would you go about it?
Well, you will probably never want to say that you have your order processor and your shipping processor, and maybe the order processor wants to talk to the shipping processor, but I can't really imagine that it should be the other way around. If it is, I think your layering is not correct. So it's more a design issue than a technical issue, I believe. If you do need this kind of things, you could solve it with events, for example, because, well, anyone can fire an event, and any other bean can listen to events, and then you can have this, well, two-way communication, basically. But for injection, just don't do that.
Okay, so now that you're talking about events, let's mess around a little bit more with them. I think it's time we should send the customer like a short text message or something like that as soon as we check out this order. And then maybe it's nice to play around with it and say the sending of the events takes like 10 seconds. Right?
Sure. You want to check if it's asynchronous?
Yeah,
or not?
if it's synchronous or asynchronous.
Messaging sounds like asynchronous, so
yes.
Let's test it. I'm going to create another class, and this is going to be the, what shall we make it? Order.
SMS notifier or something like that.
SMS notifier. It doesn't even have to be an EGB. There's just going to be a POJO. I'm not going to go to the database this time. Public void send something. And it's going to have an order as a parameter. And once again, we're just going to observe web order events. And let's keep this simple and just print it to the command line. Order processed for web order dot customer get customer dot get name. No, actually we can just deploy this and see what happens. If my event is sent, let's first see if both are invoked, and then we start messing with sleeps and, well, making it wait very long. So this is deployed. I will empty this. I should start from the start again, otherwise I don't have a conversation. Okay, start my conversation. I'm still Paul. I'm still working for Luminous. What just happened? No idea why I have two windows all of a sudden. Anyway, checkout. And somewhere here we should have an order processed.
Yeah,
there we have it, order processed for Paul. And besides that, well, there's a lot of Hibernate stuff in here, including our insert that was executed by the other order processor.
So as soon as you fire one event, then we have two observers handling the event.
Right.
Out of order, yeah.
Well, there is no order, and it's impossible in the specification right now to define orders because, well, you're just sending stuff and.
Yes, but that only determines when the event will be processed and not the order in which the events will be processed.
Well, you're talking about this JPA events. What you are talking about is JPA events, and this is specifically CDI events.
CDI events have enough.
And CDI is currently not possible to have ordering.
Okay, so what if your order is not saved to the database and you send like an email message to the customer that the order was?
Well, in that case, we just lose money. But
no, it's still transactional. I mean, you can say that it will only observe the order after the transaction has completed.
No, that's not true because
you can just add it.
Well, yeah, we can get it to that. I would say one of the options is we are going to check in my order notifier, for example. We're going to go to the database, maybe do some polling. If it's not there after 10 minutes or something like that, well, probably my transaction has failed, or we're going to run it in the same transaction. That would also be possible, and that way you can guarantee that. But we have to do some extra steps for that, because, well, the ordering here is not defined.
Okay, so what happens if you do like a long sleep around the print line?
Yes. So before that, I'm going to say time unit dot seconds dot sleep. I'm going to sleep for 10 seconds.
I'll make it 5.
Okay. Let's deploy it again and try the same scenario. Okay, so we add something to our basket again, check out. I'm just going to clear this. And now, well, if it's asynchronous, we should see the printout message immediately. Or at least see the thing going to the database immediately. If it's not asynchronous, well, it will take 10 seconds before this page comes back. And apparently, if you look at this little icon here, my page is not reloading, so it's not asynchronous. It's waiting for my sleep now. And after about 10 seconds, it came back, printed the message, and then we rendered the page.
Right, so is there a way to make it asynchronous?
Yeah, I guess there is. We could remove this seconds dot sleep. Or you could just say, this is actually an asynchronous method call. To get that to work, it should be an EGB again. It doesn't have to be a singleton, it can just be stateless. There we go. So it's a stateless, asynchronous session bin. We're going to deploy again. I don't have a conversation anymore because I redeployed. Check out. So my page is already back. The other processor was already invoked, and I'm still waiting. There it is. So you saw this message just pop up, and now it's asynchronous. Was just, well, one annotation.
Okay, so let's quick question.
How do you get the message back from your asynchronous user?
How do you get it back?
Yeah, if the order is not processed.
So if the order is not processed, okay, so there's no way to get it back because your code has already completed, so the bean's already gone. So it's a fire and forget operation.
So to do that, you have to persist thing in the database and then
Check for it later, yeah.
And then check for it later.
Yeah,
For example, yeah.
Yeah, but the event mechanism doesn't have a reply mechanism. It's just a fire and forget mechanism. Right? So there's ways to get a asynchronous result from an asynchronous method. That's possible. I mean, that method can return a result. But since we're also using an event, it's not possible to get it back in the source where you fire the event. There's a callback type. There's a callback possible for the asynchronous method. So it can return a future or an async result. It's called, and you can handle that afterwards. Right.
Just to make clear, there are two things happening here. So we have events and we have asynchronous. For asynchronous, we can have a callback that works. For events, it's just by design you can't, because events are just fire and forget, and well, you don't want to wait for anything.
Okay, so maybe it's nice to have something like a timer that will print out our orders, like say every 5 seconds or so.
I actually want to play a little bit more with those events because I think they're kind of fun.
Yeah, but I think we're almost out of time, so I want to do the timer and then some rest.
Okay,
then
sure.
we can wrap up the session.
Yep. Timer, yes. So what we want to do is maybe every night or something like that, do some end-of-day processing and give some overview of the sales we did that day. So we should have some scheduled tasks. Let's create a new EGB for that. It's the end of day timer. This is going to be another stateless session bean, and it's going to be a schedule public void run end of day. And I just wanted this code to execute every night, for example. And to schedule it, I can use, well, something even easier than the cron syntax. I can just use something like, well, I want to execute this every, let's say, I always forget the syntax. Is this right?
No, asterisk star, slash.
Like this?
Yes.
I want to run it every minute, and I want to use it, run it every hour, and I can make this much more complex by well, specifying on what kind of days of the week and well, anything I would like, or I could just specify it in cron syntax, but it's a lot easier. Let's deploy it and see if you get some messages.
While it's going on, is there any way to get those values from properties files rather than hard coding it over there? The values for the cron parameter.
Yeah, you could of course specify the schedule in a deployment descriptor, for example.
Okay.
So then you can externalize it, or you can do it programmatically. So you can write some code to create a timer, get the settings from another file, and then fire off the timer.
You can do it that way.
Yeah.
But there's no way to put a bean expression line.
No, you can't use EL here, but that's something that's discussed for future versions.
Okay. So two options there. One is create a timer on the fly.
Yeah, the other one is using a deployment descriptor.
Yep.
Like which were those old XML long documents.
That'll be the
Yeah.
EGB-jar XML.
Yes. Okay, so if you've been using timers in the past, like say Java 5 or even before, they were like really a pain in the ass to configure them, right? So you have to say, okay, well, I have to determine all of the milliseconds that I want to fire the timer after. So I have to calculate from now till the moment I want to fire it. So how many milliseconds are in between? That was really hard to do. And now we have this really nice scheduling thing going on.
Does this method run in a transaction, or is...
It does, because it is a stateless bean, and a default behavior of stateless bean, even if it's scheduled, is running in a transaction. But I could, of course, override that.
Okay, so I think there's just one feature missing in our website, which is we should have like an Amazon-like REST API. And well, I give you like 5 minutes to do that.
Okay, well, let's try that.
While he's doing that, if you have, let's say, multiple application servers running across different nodes, then you end up making that singleton, because you want to make sure that that particular
job runs only once across the entire application. So does it work with clusters, and how does that work?
That's something that's not specified for a reason, because this is implementation specific, and the application server vendor can provide features for that. So depending on your application server and depending on the configuration in there, it is either cluster-wide or single node.
What does Glassfish do and what does JBoss do?
I have absolutely no idea.
Most of the times it's once per VM. Right, so it's not cluster-aware. Not cluster safe.
So REST interface. Product resource. It should listen on some URL. Well, actually, I didn't even add JAX-RS yet. So let's go back to Forge for the last and final time. REST setup. And it will ask me, what path do you want to use? And I will let it listen to /rest. Here I say add path. It should be on the class path now. Add path, not agenda, products. And from here we're just going to go back to the add inject product data access object. And create another public list of products. This is something very weird. Yeah, better. And I'm going to tell it, well, this is going to listen to get, HTTP GET methods or requests, and it's going to produce application JSON. Okay. I used the wrong import, I believe. Better. Yeah, let's deploy and test. You could use the other 3 minutes to get me a coffee.
That's not done yet.
Yeah, true. Where's my coffee?
Well, show me XML.
Yes, sir.
Show me XML.
Okay. So we're going to add XML to this. Just another resource type, application, XML. I do need some marshalling now, so I have to go to my product and say this is also an XML root element for JAX-B. Deploy again. The only question is how I'm going to, oh well, it works. Apparently Chrome prefers XML over JSON, so that's why I see JSON now, but otherwise I could use the accept header in my HTTP request to, well, specify which one of those I want.
Can you have it do it based off the extension?
No, the return type?
Products.json would be JSON products.json.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I could show that. If I go to the resource, then I should just do something like another add path and then .xml, for example, and add another one for JSON.
So you can't just have a single method?
No, that would be nice though, and I'm not completely sure, but I believe it's in JAX-RS 2.0, which is coming in EE7.
Okay, I think that we should stop here for a while for live coding, then we do a little bit of a wrap up, and then we have some time left to do some remaining questions, right? So let's get back to the slides, please.
Yeah, I'm looking for them, but
Close it.
I did, yeah. Okay.
Okay, so if we recap a little bit of what we have been building in the past 1.5 hours or so, Then, well, we started off with showing you a little bit of a 5-tier architecture, and I've drawn up that architecture once again on this slide, but this time from top to bottom. So what we see in the bottom layer is our database. So we had a MySQL database running. Within our database, you have a very simple data model, consists of a product, a customer, and a web order. So that resides in the database. That's exactly where we should keep the data. Then on top of that, we've been doing some data access. And most of the data access have been done directly by JPA, right? So we've been using the Entity Manager and the Criteria API in order to get things in and out of the database. On top of that, we had a number of EJBs. And, well, like in the past, well, I made a little joke about it, but in the past, EJBs were considered harmful. But right now, they're just POJOs, and which have automatic transaction management and have a nice integration with JPA. So, for example, every time I do something with JPA in my EJB methods, I get automatic transactions. So JPA will also propagate that transaction to the database and will store it eventually there. So there's a nice integration with that as well. And on top of my EJBs, for example, well, you just showed it a couple of minutes ago, we can have like a REST interface, so exposing the return values from my JPA layer immediately using REST, for example. So we have a clean separation there as well. Right, so that's the little lollipop that I've drawn over there. And then all of the other business logic parts are residing in the business logic part of our architecture. So we had like just plain simple POJOs doing, for example, the SMSing, the SMS processing. We had like order processors doing some transactional stuff. There were EJBs as well. And then we had something like a data access object, which was also, well, actually, it depends a little bit if you want to see it as part of the business logic or if you want to see it as a little wrapper around JPA in the data access layer of your application. So if you move up one more layer, then we see some beans which are assisting JSF, for example. So they are actually the backing beans of the page. So one of them is the products bean, and the products bean is our intermediary between actually the web pages and the business logic, which is contained in the EJBs. And then we had our basket, which contains our products. So if you look at the picture, all the arrows point downwards, which is good from an architectural standpoint. So we have clean separation of concerns. At some points, we used events to do decoupling, which is a very nice feature of CDI. So I recommend you to use that in your application as well. And then we had the presentation logic totally separated out in XHTML files. So we did something for like an index page and like a detail page and an order page in there. So eventually, there's still some of our old-fashioned patterns in there, something like a data access object might still be there in your new Java EE6 application. But some of the other traditional patterns that you might have known from the past, like value objects, or for example service locators or stuff like that, you don't have them anymore in Java EE6 because everything is now decoupled by default and there's like really nice places to put them within the framework itself. So we've been building components for all 5 layers of the architecture, and actually we use nothing else but just plain Java EE6. So if we compile the application and build our WAR file, it's going to be a very small WAR file, just a couple of kilobytes. And that's just because all of the framework pieces are in the application server already, right? So you didn't have to download anything by Maven and then just put all of the frameworks within the application and then deploy that into the application server or in the web server. So your deployment archive is still really, really small. That's an interesting discussion because in the past, Java EE was considered to be really heavyweight, and you had to like wait 30 seconds for your application server to start up. And nowadays, application servers start up in like 3-4 seconds maybe. 4 seconds if you have a really slow application server. And then you deploy your application in the application server, and your application is also very small, just a couple of kilobytes. So it will also deploy very fast. So actually the whole debate about being lightweight versus being heavyweight is now actually turning around. I mean, Java EE, everything is contained in the application server. Your application is really small, so it's really lightweight. And then, for example, if you take Spring, you have like a 50 or 100 megabyte WAR file, and that will take you some time to deploy, right? Because actually what you're doing with Spring is you are bundling the sort of an application server yourself and deploying it on top of your web container, right? So the whole lightweight versus heavyweight debate is being turned around. So of course there are some downsides to Java EE. I mean, in the past, you know, when you do architectural and design discussion, you use terminology like keep it simple or don't repeat yourself or you ain't gonna need it and all those buzzwords, right? And in the past we could just talk about it, but we could never do it in practice. And now, as you've seen in our architectural diagram, actually what you can do is just strip off all of the overhead. So all the things you don't need, you don't code, right? No more fancy interfaces to have an EJB. You can just call the EJB directly from JSF pages. So no more like triple layers of value objects and copying values through all of those layers. I mean, all the stuff that you don't want to write, you don't have to write it anymore, right? So another downside is that you write less code. So if you have a bug, that means that you have more bugs per lines of code, right? So this is something that your boss is probably not gonna like, right? So if your raise at the end of the year depends on the number of bugs per lines of code, then you should probably not use Java E6. Just do Spring then, right? So, and the other thing is, like I mentioned a couple of times before, you get really small WAR files. So yeah, right, you get something like, well, you spent 3 months building this application, you just have a 100 kilobyte WAR file, so this can't be good, right? Well, actually it is. So, you probably have tons of questions. You have like a couple of minutes left, actually 2, I think. So maybe we should take the questions offline. And if you have any questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to us using Twitter or via our email addresses. Or just come up to us. And one more shameless plug. So if you're a Spring hater, raise your hand. And we have another session tomorrow afternoon in which we show you how to migrate away from the Spring framework. So if you have existing Spring applications and you want to build really cool Java EE applications, I mean, then you should definitely come to that session. And there's really a serious note in there as well, because if you've built Spring applications like 5 years ago, then those applications will now contain a lot of technical debt, right? Because you chose frameworks which will probably not exist anymore. Maybe you chose JDO, or you chose some fancy web framework which is now deprecated. So maybe you're facing a lot of upgrade issues on those applications. And because your application has to go for another 5 or 10 years or so. So instead of doing a lot of work and upgrading everything within Spring, which takes you a lot of work anyway, why not take a little bit of an extra step and convert them to being like standard-based applications? So there is really a serious business case in doing so. So if you're interested in that, please come to our session tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m. It will be in the same hotel in a different room. I believe it's 1 floor up. And that leaves us the final slide with some funny pictures. And there's a URL where you can download a similar project, but I think we'll put a new link to this code on Twitter. So if you if you look at one of our if you follow one of us on Twitter, you will probably see the link and you can download the code of it. All right.
Great.
So that's about it. Thank you.